Hi there, my name is Ewan Nicholson and welcome to my YouTube channel. The title of today's video is why I am happy not to be the best version of myself. Yeah! So let's have a look at that. What does that mean? What am I talking about? Am I just trying to be contrary for contrary's sake? And if I'm not striving to be the best version of myself, well, what am I doing? So let's go along and have a look at what that means, and let me share with you maybe a different perspective on being or not being the best version of ourselves. Now, you could say, look, on the surface of it, who doesn't want to be the best version of themselves? Who doesn't want to arise and become a better version of who they are? And I think you see with a lot of these kind of quotes and sort of Instagram self-help, on the surface, these things can be inspiring. These quotes can kind of uplift us and motivate us and affirm us to kind of move forward and be, the best version of ourselves. But like a lot of kind of quotes and platitudes and slogans, that when you kind of break them down, they don't quite make the sense that they appear to on the surface, whether it's make America great again or whether it's restore the soul of a nation. Particularly political platitudes as well as self-help platitudes tend to, when you kind of break them apart and really look under the bonnet of what they really mean, how do you measure them, how do you define these terms, what is a soul, what is a nation, what is great, what is restore, etc., etc., etc. You get to the point where they don't really mean anything. They sound good, but they're very hard to kind of break apart and say, this is what this really means, and this is how exactly you would do this, and this is exactly how you would know you've arrived at this kind of arbitrary point. And when people talk about being the best version of themselves, or I want to be the best version of myself, there's a lot of things contained in that one statement that I think are worth really picking apart a little bit and looking and saying, well, does that make sense? And the first thing is, what is it to be the best version of ourselves? Now, the moment we use the term best, it works in conjunction with the opposite, which is worst. And then maybe somewhere in the middle we have our most average version of ourselves. So we have worst when I wake up, average during the day, and then maybe at the end of the day I'm my best, And we have this spectrum of worst, average, and best. So the moment you're saying, I want to be the best version of myself, you are assuming there is a worst version and there is a mediocre version, and you're somewhere in between those things, because if you're striving to be your best version of yourself, well, you're not there yet, so you must be either in your worst, mediocre, or somewhere between mediocre and best. So already that creates a little bit of a problem, because how do we categorize worst? And is having a difficult time and struggling with depression and anxiety, is that your worst version, or is that just kind of where you're at and you're doing your best version in your worst scenario? Is there such thing as being an average version of yourself if you are doing your best? Are you doing your best? And if you're not doing your best, why aren't you doing your best? And are there circumstances that are difficult for you to do your best and it's not really your fault? Or no, it is your fault. You really need to be working a bit hard to be this best version of yourself. Once if this best version of yourself requires things that aren't available to you, either internal resources or external resources, is that on you or is that on society? On and on it goes. So the first thing is, as soon as we create a category of best, we have to look at it in terms of worst. We have to then say, where are we in that process? The second thing is the version of myself that's best, is it my version? Is it what I consider to be my best? And that's what we should be going off, like what I, Ewan, think is my best version of myself. Now, maybe my best version of myself is being more loving and being more kind. Maybe Ted Bundy's best version of himself is killing more women successfully. So an individual definition of best can be relative to that person's personality, their neurosis, their issues, their history, their culture, etc. And maybe we don't want Ted Bundy to be the best version of himself. So our individual definition of that is very, very subjective. So individual versions of our best version of ourselves can be problematic, because we carry with us our trauma and our past and our history and our culture, and maybe that is our best version, maybe it isn't. So if we don't go off the individual version, or we have to be wary of that, do we go off our culture? Is it today's culture? Because a woman in 2020, her best version of herself is this, this, and this. 50 years ago, it would have been something different. In Indonesia, it may be one thing. In Australia, it may be another. So best versions is culturally relative, it's religiously relative, and it's economically relative. In capitalism, the best version of ourselves is productive and has an output, and it is contributing to the economy and adding value, etc., etc., etc. So the moment you really start to look at this definition of best version, it's fraught with a lot of grey area and a lot of abstract definitions of what is best defined by what. So that's the first thing. Now, I'm not even going to go into what are we defining as self when we say the best version of myself. What part of myself? My ego, my personality, the self defined by Western psychology, the self defined by Buddhism, the self defined by Freud, Jung. What are we talking about here? What aspect of ourselves? So let's not even go into that, but even that is a whole minefield of definitions and interpretations and philosophies. So you're saying best is relative, self is relative. So where do you even begin with that when you can't decide on what the self is and what best is? Now you could be thinking, Ewan, you're overcomplicating this. It's just one of those things. Just be the best version of ourselves means be more loving and be more caring. Like, don't overthink this, don't overanalyze it. Okay, let's assume that's the case. Let's put all these kind of overly thought through questions aside and just say let's all agree best means better in the sense of more loving, more kind, more this, more that, the other. So let's imagine that. We'll just agree on that for the time being. So here I am, I want to be more of all these things and I am striving to be the best version of myself. Well, what happens when I get there? What happens when I do become the best version of myself? And I'm there for a couple of years. Now, has that now gone back down to an average version of myself? I now have to kind of push further. Like, is there any arbitrary point where you can say I've arrived at the best version of myself? And I think the nature of striving is problematic, because the moment you get to where you're striving to, that aspect in you that strives then creates another goal or another best version of yourself you have to work towards. So if you don't strive to be the best version of yourself, what do you strive for? And I think this is where we enter a different territory, because what you can do is start to think about not striving. And I think we're in a very kind of dualistic either-or way of thinking in our culture, where I'm either working hard or I'm being lazy. Either I'm being active or I'm being inactive. Either I'm making money or I'm losing money. I have debt, I have savings. So we think in terms of it's either this or it's that. So if we're not striving, we're not pushing our way forward, then we're sitting back on the beach relaxing and doing nothing. We're either progressing or we're regressing. I think it's worth stepping outside of that model and thinking and pondering, are there other ways things come into being? Are there other ways growth occurs outside of a pushing, striving model? And I think if you look at the way children learn languages, children don't strive to learn languages, they just absorb it. The infrastructure internally is built for it. If you look at an apple tree, it doesn't strive to grow apples, it's all built inside it and it does it naturally. And I think there is a way of things coming into being outside of I'm here and I need to get there. I'm in this worst version of myself, I need to be my best version of myself. And it comes from a relaxed, what I would describe as a natural place, or in Taoism they call it effortless effort, where things are arising and we're moving, but outside of this dichotomy of here, there. But I think it's worth being open to letting go of trying to get from here to there, to get to a best version of ourselves, and put our attention more on being accepting of where we are, being grateful for where we are, being honest about where we are and observing, where am I? Allowing ourselves to feel comfortable in the present moment, in where we are now, without feeling like we need to get to a better version of ourselves. And it's hard, it's hard, because I think there's so much of our culture that's driven and drives us towards getting more of something internally or externally, living up to a certain kind of expectation and arrival. And I think to get to a point where you feel like you can let go of that and to say, well, rather than striving to be the best version of myself, I'd like to be just more accepting of where I am. That can feel weird, or it can feel kind of, discombobulating, because there's this thing of, well, shouldn't I be moving forward? Shouldn't I be pushing? Shouldn't I be aspiring to be better at whatever I do? And if I let go of that, then what? And yeah, it's an interesting place to kind of sit in, like, yeah, then what? One's if there's nothing. One's if we're just here and this is happening, you get up and you do your thing, and these progressions emerge naturally, and they don't come from us striving. They don't come from an understanding that we're average and we need to be better. They come from a more serene place and a more relaxed place and a more accepting place. So, I would invite you to ponder and reflect on what is it to not strive to be better. What is it to not strive to be the best version of yourself? What would happen if you were just, here I am, I'm just this version at this moment in this place, and that's okay. It's okay to be here, even if it's painful, even if it's uncomfortable, but it is very much here I am. I'm here, and I'm okay with being here, and I'm aware that I'm here, and I'm observing the fact that I'm here, and I'm trusting that out of that quiet space of acceptance and observation, then things will arise naturally. I'm not going to be marooned or stuck or trapped in that place. Quite the opposite. So look, I hope this has made sense. I hope this has been helpful. If you've got any insights or comments on your own experience of bettering yourself or being the best version of yourself, please leave them in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for listening, and please take care of yourself.